Hey, welcome in. Well, you were probably already aware of this, but Canada is not a serious country anymore. Canada keeps electing a woke snowboard instructor to be prime minister for some reason. You've got comedians that have to go to the Supreme Court to be able to tell jokes, as in the case of Mike Ward, who won by a razor-thin margin, 5-4. So comedy doesn't have a bright future in Canada, I don't think. Got some of the most authoritarian COOF mandates in the world, and so it's really no surprise to see headlines like this. Professor of Color says he was denied funding for insufficient dedication to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Did I mention that this guy is the Prime Minister? A chemistry professor who was born in India says he has been denied grants for the past 2 years because he hasn't sufficiently pledged his dedication to equity, diversity, and inclusion. You'll notice that the scientific method isn't mentioned there, right? Canada's a woke postmodernist utopia now. Reality doesn't matter. Let's see, Professor, and I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Patanjali Kambampati, again, I hope I'm saying that right, told the College Fix that he develops lasers and laser-based instrumentation to measure the motion of electrons and atoms in materials that might be used in anything from solar cells to flat panel displays, to lasers, to next-generation computers. Since 2003, he has been conducting his research at McGill University's Department of Chemistry. Maybe if he'd said the electrons he was studying were systemically oppressed or something, maybe that would have helped. Let's see, he says over his 15 years of work, he has raised nearly $7 million from the Canadian government and from elsewhere. So it's not the university here, it's the federal government. But anyway, he continues, but everything seemed to change about a year or two ago. In the last 2 years, the federal grants have begun to ask for equity, diversity, and inclusion statements. Initially, they started asking us to state our EDI position, which is a new thing. The newer thing happened in the last year, where the federal agencies said we're going to look at your EDI statements first and foremost. That will be the gatekeeper. Science doesn't matter. Reality doesn't matter. Ideology comes first. This is really bad. This is a really bad thing when a country is looking to compete in an increasingly technologically advanced world. And I'll repeat that. The federal agencies said we're going to look at your EDI statements first and foremost. That will be the gatekeeper. The research doesn't matter as much as the ideology. That is insane. But what could go wrong, really? Well, let me introduce you to Trofim Lysenko. He was a Soviet scientist, an agronomist and biologist, and he was much more concerned with ideology than he was with reality. But again, what could go wrong? Well, let's see. Lysenko forced farmers to plant seeds very close together since, according to his law of the life of species, plants from the same class never compete with one another. Lysenko played an active role in the famines that caused the deaths of millions of Soviet people, and his practices prolonged and exacerbated the food shortages. The People's Republic of China, under Mao Zedong, adopted his methods starting in 1958, with calamitous results, culminating in the Great Chinese Famine of 1959 to 1962, in which some 15 to 55 million people died. Outside the Soviet Union, scientists spoke critically. British biologist S.C. Harland lamented that Lysenko was completely ignorant of the elementary principles of genetics and plant physiology. Now, of course, this criticism from foreigners did not sit well with Lysenko, who loathed Western bourgeois scientists and denounced them as tools of imperialist oppressors. Sound like any group today? Sound familiar at all? So, yeah, it does matter. Like, getting reality right matters. It sure as hell matters when you're starving to death. I think everybody should be concerned, because these things do have genuine consequences. But anyway, let's get back to this professor who's not diverse enough for the diversity police. Anyway, he said that if a researcher didn't write a statement that satisfied federal funding agencies, those agencies wouldn't even look at the scientific merits of the work. All that mattered was the stated commitment to diversity. They wouldn't even look at the scientific merits of the work. completely backwards. And when you look at his EDI statement that he did put in, you'd think this is exactly what they want. The problem is this stuff just keeps marching further and further and getting more and more extreme, more and more difficult to satisfy. I mean, here he talks about how he's a racialized minority. Racialized is a word that's very popular in the Canadian media. It's a word that the left uses as a weapon. And the irony is that the only people that are absolutely obsessed with race are leftists. If anybody's racializing anybody, it's the left. But again, as always, they are a lunatic screaming into a mirror and they don't recognize themselves. But anyway, it says that he's a racialized minority from the third world, from 3 nations, and how with his lived experience, he can leverage those experiences to provide a more inclusive and equitable environment for an ever-increasing bandwidth of people aiming to do world-class laser science. He emphasized his group's long history of inclusion of women into ultra-fast laser science, all of which should just be completely irrelevant. If his work deserves the grant from the government, it doesn't matter where he comes from or what his race is. If it deserves it, he should get it, because that would be a productive use of the money. That would be sensible. But did I mention how Canada keeps electing a woke snowboard instructor? Anyway, this apparently was not enough to receive funding from the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada. His request was denied. And the denial letter said this. It said, the equity, diversity, and inclusion considerations in the application were deemed insufficient. The training plan did not adequately describe specific, concrete practices that will be put in place to ensure that EDI is intentionally and proactively supported in the training plan. Vague or generic statements are not sufficient, and therefore the application is being rejected. He told the College Fix he found the letter frustrating as an Indian American working in Canada. I bet it would be frustrating just for any scientist. Any scientist who just cares about their work, who cares about reality. And someone who just wants to live in a rational society, because this is beyond irrational. Like when it says here, we're going to look at your EDI statements first and foremost, when they're saying that what is essentially just a political ideology is the most important thing, this is the Soviet Union now. This is not how a liberal democracy is supposed to operate. This stuff does end up having real world consequences, bad ones, dangerous ones. And if you're wondering when Canada's going to wake up from this, did I mention that this guy is the Prime Minister? Anyway, that's all I got to say about that. Please subscribe, like, and share. That really helps me out. If you just like to listen, there's the podcast Radio Baloney. It's on pretty much every platform. If you look for it, you will find it. Thank you very much. I'll see you next time.